Hi, everyone. I'm Charles Suggs, software engineer at SmartLogic, and I'm your host for today. For Season 14, Episode 10, we're joined by Victor Björklund, Elixir developer at jawdropping.io. In this episode, we're talking about Python-Elixir interoperability with a multitude of tools, including ErlPort, PythonX, ports, and more. Victor, welcome to Elixir Wizards.
All right, thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Yeah. Maybe first, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you? How did you get started writing code? What brought you to Elixir?
Sure. So right now I'm sitting in Warsaw, Poland, but I'm also spending a lot of time in Stockholm, where I'm from, Stockholm, Sweden. And my background to programming was even when I was 12, I was coding some in C++, not knowing anything I was doing, not some genius or something like that, but just playing, and dreaming about being a developer. Kind of dropped it off for a while and got back to Python, actually, when I was an adult in university. And I discovered that you can do some really cool automations and stuff like that. I wrote some Reddit bot, but it wasn't any professional stuff. And then much later, I got into building React websites and Node backends and working with that more professionally. And after that, I got into Elixir and got sucked in. So that's my journey here.
What was it that kind of hooked you with Elixir?
So initially, I actually started because of a very stupid reason. I saw some people talking about Elixir on the internet. I didn't know why Elixir was good, but I heard that, Elixir is kind of the same thing as Erlang. It's running on the Beam, and Erlang was invented in Sweden. So I thought that, I gotta try to at least see what it is all about and, be able to say, let's try it. And pretty fast when I tried it, it just clicked. And I think it was a lot with the functional thing. For me, objective-oriented programming never really made sense. So as soon as I tried out Elixir, I'm like, this makes sense. Everything here is just how I wanted it to work from the start. So, yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm definitely eager to dig into the topic of today's episode. There's a lot of ways that we can call Python from Elixir. We've mentioned a few before already. Can you kind of map out that landscape for someone who might be just getting started with some kind of interop between Python and Elixir?
Sure. And as you touched on, there is a lot of different ways. I haven't actually tried all of them myself.
Sure.
I haven't really had an opportunity to try them, but how I view it is kind of, you can think about it as how coupled Python becomes with your application. So we have mentioned that we can have just a normal HTTP or REST API, or we can have ErlPorts or ports or PythonX. And I think if we start with like the least coupling with our Elixir code, we have the building two separate apps in principle, where you have the Python app running as its own web app. And it could run on the same machine and you can use localhost, talk to it, but they are pretty much, they don't know so much about each other. And then you have something strange in between where you could actually run Python as an Erlang node. So that Python is actually running on its own Erlang node and you can send remote calls to it just like any other node in your cluster. I haven't tried that myself, but that's in between, I guess, the more API and what comes later, which is more you put it on the machine. Either you communicate through ports or ErlPort, or you have PythonX, which is actually embedding the Python interpreter inside of Elixir using a NIS.
If you were to connect a little bit of these approaches with some of the tools, so if you were standing up Python as an Erlang node, that would probably be with, is that Erlang? And then...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And full disclosure, I haven't tried myself, so I don't know how performant it is or like how easy it is to work with. But I think it's something pretty cool that we have so many ways to integrate with Python.
And you talked about with PythonX, you now have Python running as kind of part of your Elixir application.
And I will just be heads up. I don't know everything about the underlying libraries and everything about how Python works. So there is a risk that I will say something that is not correct. So if I say something that's not 100% correct on how something works, feel free to correct it in some forum or something. But as far as I understand, it's running as a NIF and it's running on the same process, which makes it very fast, but it also comes with its own drawbacks.
So then do you still have to worry about the global interpreter lock that Python has that can be kind of a bottleneck in running, say, concurrent jobs in Python when you use that approach?
Yeah, exactly. So when you're running, if you're using ErlPort, which at least is my kind of default to fall back to, you have that issue too with the global interpreter lock, but you can avoid it by just running a lot of different Python processes. So you can either run a pool, you can run one per job, and so on. While PythonX, as far as I understand, you only have one instance of Python running, which means that you have that issue with the global interpreter lock. It doesn't have to always be an issue. It kind of depends on how you write your code and how the Python code looks like. It's a little bit beyond my understanding, but as far as I understand, a lot of the Python code is written so that it can avoid those issues, especially if it's things relating to machine learning. They call a lot of like C++ code or C code.
Okay, that makes sense. So what other kind of trade-offs might you be thinking about as you're choosing to use ErlPort and maybe something like Poolboy to manage several ports where you have Python running versus using it as an external service or embedded with Elixir?
I kind of default to ErlPort because I think it's a pretty good sweet spot. And then you can think about kind of like which kind of code are you calling? And are you calling just a very short Python function in a library? Then maybe PythonX is a pretty good option. Again, you have the risk of running into some issues since you're just running one instance. And also you run the risk of taking down your whole Beam instance if you have some issues with the Python code. But if you need some little bit more speed, that can be a good idea. Or if you're running something that is very standalone from Elixir, like maybe you have a background job in Python, then maybe you should have it as a separate like web app. So there is no real, I think, answer always. It's kind of more like you have to feel like what's your goals with integration.
Okay. You mentioned a little bit ago about if you're using ErlPort and connecting to Python processes through ports and maybe managing a pool of ports.
Yeah.
How do you think about how to structure that for the use case?
Yeah. So that's a good point. And so out of the box, the default that you start with is kind of that you start a new Python process every time when you run the code, and then you stop the Python process when you're finished. And that could work. For example, like I have used it to put some Python code that's running once per month in an open job. And I think it's not something that needs to be very fast. And then I think it's totally okay to start a new Python process just for that and close it when we're finished with this thing. But if you're having something that needs to be called a lot of times, you don't want to have the overhead of that. So you need to then put it in some kind of pool, and you can use Poolboy, for example. But also there is a library. It's rather new. I just used it for a couple of months, and it's called, probably gonna pronounce this totally wrong, so just check in the notes. Venomous, as in a poisonous snake. It's an Elixir library, and it gives you some very good defaults for ErlPort, where it's handling the pool for you, and it will handle the cleanup of the pool and a few things like that, and give back the errors from Python in a very nice way. So it's a very good library to. That's what I would use today if I was using ErlPort.
Good to know. I've used Poolboy with ErlPort, but I haven't come
Yeah,
across Venomous, and I would say you
yeah,
pronounced it better than I pronounced your name, so that works.
yeah.
So then, you're firing jobs off to Poolboy, perhaps, or to
Mhm.
Python. You're asking Python to do something. Presumably, you want something to come back from that when it's done. Maybe not. Depends on what's going on. But
Yeah.
how do you handle that data interchange and getting the data back into a Beam application?
For me, I haven't run into any issues with that. Like sometimes at least the way I program is that I test something and see what happens. And so far, it's never been any big issues. It might be that you get back to your string as a series of numbers instead, and you have to convert them from a car list to a normal string. But so far, I think ErlPort is handling a lot of this translation. So a lot of times it just works out of the box, I would say. But I haven't really used any complicated data structures for passing between like binaries or streams other than just streaming the standard output.
Okay. And are we largely getting back Elixir data structures in the Elixir function that called or what's responding to what's coming back from Python typically?
Yeah, so you get back like it ends up being a data type in Elixir, and the only thing you need to check then is like, is it coming back in the format you expected and that you want? Sometimes you can get it in the wrong format, but as I said, it's usually not a big deal. Might come back in JSON and you have translated it to a map or similar. So I think it's not the biggest issue, and I don't have any like on the top of my head solution for it. I usually just solve it when I'm there. You kind of see what is Python giving me back and how do I fix it to be the right format.
Let's step back a little bit to performance and also thinking about concurrency. The Beam and Elixir can handle concurrency really well and even parallelism. And Python is known for having a little bit of a bottleneck there with the global interpreter lock or the GIL. I don't know how Python folks pronounce the acronym there, but when we're marrying these two, Elixir and Python, what kind of performance and concurrency considerations come up when you're firing off, say, multiple Python calls from a gen server or a similar type of tool in Elixir?
Yeah, I think if you have good Python code, like I usually don't write so much Python code myself when I'm integrating with Elixir, because if I'm writing the code myself, I rather write it in Elixir from the start. So it's more that, if there is a very good library already existing in Python, I might try to integrate with that one. And usually then they have very good quality of the Python code, trying to avoid these issues with like the global interpreter lock. That's not always the case, of course, but you can also avoid it. So at least the case for me is when I reach for Python, it's usually because they have a really good, well-written library in Python. And I feel like it's going to take too long time to rebuild it in Elixir, or I feel like this is above my head and I cannot even implement it in Elixir in a good way. And don't ask me exactly what, because I'm not a Python expert, but as far as I understand, there is a lot of things you can do to avoid it becoming an issue. And then we also have what we can do on the Elixir side, and that is if we're using ErlPort, for example, then we can spin up many processes, maybe one for each thing we're doing, or having a pool of Python processes like we mentioned a little bit earlier. And that way we have less risk of running into that issue.
And this reminds me of something about ErlPort. If I remember correctly, one of the benefits of using something like ErlPort or maybe Poolboy for managing a pool of ports, that's more what I'm getting at, I think, is that you save that expense of shutting down and starting up new processes every time you need to call out to Python. They're kind of hot and ready for you.
Yeah.
But you mentioned that some Python libraries might not be good to use here. Are there any you've come across that it might be worth avoiding to integrate with
Um,
Elixir?
I don't think so, but I think if you, I haven't come across any that I think, oh, this is a very bad idea. But
Okay.
I'm sure there exists a lot of bad Python code. So I guess what one could do is just a little bit Google, maybe global interpreter log plus the library name. And you can probably find out if there is an issue or not with this particular library.
Okay.
So, but I don't think there is any list of libraries that are good or bad for Elixir. It just depends on what you need. Because sometimes you might not even need so much performance. You might be fine if it takes 10 minutes or 20 minutes. It doesn't matter if it's a monthly report going out,
Mhm.
so
Sure. It all depends.
yeah.
So let's say that there's some error or even a crash that happens in the Python code.
Mm.
How might you handle that and integrating some fault tolerance either into the Python code or on the Elixir side to handle that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the best thing would be to kind of try to do it on the both sides. On the Python side, you have to write the code with, I don't remember what it's called now. I'm so confused with the JavaScript, but I think it's called try catch that they're using in Python. You have to try to catch the error. So the
Mhm.
best way would be to handle it in the Python. But I think it's always good to also prepare Elixir for it to be a problem. So either you can try to pattern match on the thing you get back in Elixir, or if you're using, for example, this library I mentioned earlier, Venomous, they give you back an error struct. So you can then, match on that and handle it. And how you handle it, I guess it depends on what kind of error and how important it is. If you just restart the Python code again, or if you're, shutting down that function or, yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Mhm.
And as far as I understand, I think that ErlPort is handling also the restarts of the Python process.
Yeah.
So if Python crashes, ErlPort will restart the Python process, as far as I understand. But I'm a little bit unsure on that. But that's a good reason also to use a pool, I guess.
That sounds a little bit like what I recall from working with that
Yeah.
some years ago. So then what about patterns or tools to trace Python calls, monitoring latency or failures in production? Does that get a little bit more complicated?
I don't think so. I probably should have a lot more telemetry and stuff like that. But since, like I told you before, when I use Python in Elixir projects, it's usually for some library that is already well written. And it is probably a very bad practice, but I often just trust that this Python library is as good written as possible in Python. So I don't really try to measure maybe the performance inside of the Python code, but rather just check for the latency with telemetry for the Elixir function doing the call. So, if you see some spikes there, you can investigate, but I don't have any real insight into the Python code.
What about writing tests for the interop for the integration?
Yeah. So I think you can first of all write just Python tests like you would for a Python program, and then also write the tests on Elixir. And what I found is that you have to a little bit write the tests depending on how long you think your Python function is going to take. So if you have a very fast function, you can just pretty much call the Python function as you're doing in production code in the test. But sometimes you might have, like, for example, a Python script that goes away and creates a very complicated report. And then you might not want to spend all of that time if it takes 10 minutes every time you run a test. So then I usually just mock the data I expect coming back.
Mhm.
And you can test Python code separately then.
Good separation of concerns. So then what about shipping this off in a release to production. Is there anything people should know about shipping Python dependencies with an Elixir release?
I guess the first thing to consider is, do we need a Python or can we do this with Elixir? And if there is a way to do it in Elixir, it's probably preferable. But sometimes Python has a lot of very good libraries that we don't have because they have such a massive user base. So sometimes you need to. And then you just have to, again, think about a little bit about what type of integration you want with Elixir. Do you want to have it as a separate web app that you can call? Benefit with that is you can pretty much have two different teams writing the Python code and the Elixir code, and you can also very easily scale them separately. Like if the Python code needs a lot more resources, sometimes you can just put them on a different machines and spin up extra machines just for the Python code while keeping your Elixir machines the same. But sometimes you want to have it closer. And then I would say, if you're unsure, I would probably go with ErlPort with some kind of pool. But if you need that extra speed and you know that you're not going to run into an issue with the global interpreter lock, which is hard to predict, but you will probably have to just test it, then I think PythonX is a really nice way, not just because it's very fast, but also because it is a little bit nicer to write, in my opinion, because you co-locate the Python code with your Elixir code. So it can be a little bit easier to reason around.
Can you share some real world examples where using Elixir and Python interoperability maybe unlock some feature or a performance win that you couldn't do with maybe just Elixir or just Python, though you're Elixir first, so maybe it's more the first?
Yeah, sure. So actually my first Elixir project ever had to integrate Python, or at least I wanted to integrate Python. I was pretty recent to Elixir, but I had worked with building different types of web scraping solutions in Python. And the client, they needed a way to schedule a lot of web crawling operations. And there is a very good library in Python called Scrapy, and it has been around for many, many years, and it's very well written and very performant. As long as you don't need Google-size performance of your crawler, it's a very good choice. So I actually implemented that with ErlPort because I saw that there was some crawling solutions around in Elixir, but I didn't feel confident enough in both that I was good enough with Elixir and also that those libraries would have all of the functionality that I needed. They might have, I'm not saying that they don't have it, but it's just that this Scrapy library is a very, very big project. So, and then I have a more recent project actually. And this scraping project, it never went into production. The client realized they didn't actually need it. So never went anywhere. So I don't know if it would have survived production, but it was a nice introduction to working with Elixir. And then more recently, I worked on a proof of concept where we had to integrate with a Swedish authentication solution called BankID. So it's pretty much that all people in Sweden have this certificate on their computers and their phones so they can authenticate who they are. And there is a lot of back and forth and authentication protocols to communicate with this server and verify that people are who they are. And there is actually a library in Elixir, but I was a little bit unsure whether that library would have all of the functionality and if it would stay updated in a few years, because it is much smaller community in Elixir. So I thought maybe not, it will not be updated since such a small niche thing. And I wasn't sure if anybody was really using it in production. So then I instead turned to a Python library that I know is used by a lot of big companies. So it's going to be kept up to date with all the changes. And I actually went for PythonX in that case because I felt like it was a case where you're never going to have very long running processes and you're never going to have millions of authentication processes going on at the same time. So I thought that it was a good case to try out PythonX. So yeah, both of them you probably could have done in Elixir, but it would probably have been a little bit more risky and a little bit harder to do in Elixir. So good cases bringing some Python functionality to Elixir.
Okay. And that worked out pretty well, that approach.
Yeah, it worked flawlessly. So it's still not in production. It's still proof of concept. We're still working on it, but the authentication had no problem. It was very easy to just call those Python functions that was needed to make the communication with this server and then hand it off to Phoenix's own authentication solution. So
then are there any emerging patterns or libraries that you're excited about beyond ErlPort and PythonX for Python and Elixir integration?
I think I want personally, I'm not sure if it's more performant or anything, but I think it's a very cool thing. And I just need to find some reason to play around with it. And it's this Erlang, or maybe I totally misremember the name of the library now, this that turns Python into an Erlang node. I just think it's such a cool concept that we can just run nodes in other language and communicate with them as if they were in the beam.
Yeah, that seems really interesting. I'm curious to hear what interesting things someone will encounter running Python as an Erlang node.
So if anybody is running Python as an Erlang node, please reach out to me and tell me about it because I'm very curious.
Yeah, us too. Well, looking ahead, how do you see this interop story evolving? Are there some gaps in the ecosystem that could be filled, or is there a good bit of overlap now in kind of the coverage?
I don't know if there is any like a gap that we're feeling, oh, this is a big pain point, but I don't know if this is even possible. But I think PythonX is such a nice library to work with. So I just wish there was a way to run several versions of it in the same Elixir application. There is probably some really good reason why that is impossible, but that would have been nice if somebody could figure out how to do that. I think that would be nice.
Interesting. Multiple versions of the same library within the same application?
No, I more meant like PythonX, so multiple Python interpreter instances so that you can a little bit almost have like a pool of them but inside of Elixir. So you can avoid this issue with the global interpreter lock. I'm not sure if it seems like it's not possible. I'm not sure exactly why, but it's probably very hard. But it's a wish list.
You have some gears turning in my head now.
Yes.
Well, for Elixir teams that are considering doing some kind of integration with Python today, is there a first hello world project or a minimal proof of concept that you would recommend people start with?
Yeah, so I mean, you could always do the actually hello world with Python code, but that might not give you so much insight into how it would actually run. I think a pretty good use case is try to find something where you could use Python, or if you're already using Python that is not running so often, you don't want to maybe bring it in the first time in some hot path in your application. But for example, if you have a report being done by Python once per month, you could just try and bring in ErlPort and call it from within the application. I think that's a good way to start and kind of learn and see what's happening and what could go wrong. And hopefully that's not the end of the world if that report doesn't go out in time.
Would you say PythonX is kind of your favorite Elixir library for managing external runtimes, or is there one we've not talked about?
I think my favorite probably is ErlPort, and together with this Venomous that is on top of ErlPort and just gives you a lot of nice things like a pool and error handling and a lot of other things like that. That is probably my favorite to actually use. I think PythonX is just very nice to work with, but a lot of times you want to just plan ahead and maybe use more ports just to not run into that issue in the future. If you're having a lot of users and, don't want to be stuck then with PythonX. But if you know from the start that PythonX is a good use case, then it's more nice to write, I think.
Any must-read resources for people who want to dive into Elixir and Python interop?
I think there is very few things written. I don't know if there's so much. I have an article. I don't remember who wrote it, but I will send it to you guys so you can put it in the notes about how to use ErlPort with a pool boy. And yeah, but in general, I think there is not so much written. You have to almost Google and find the puzzle pieces in Elixir forum and other places. So maybe I will try to write something about this Venomous library. I have a very short article on ErlPort, but it's very short and I'm not sure that you get so much insights from that. But this Venomous, I've not seen anybody write about using it. So I think it could be nice to write something about that, even if the documentation is very good. So you don't really need it, but yeah.
Well, let us know if you publish something and send us a link. And I want to say I've come across a couple of older like Medium posts, blog posts that are out there about using Python with Elixir that I reference when I was doing some of this in 2022 or something.
I mean, feel free to put them in the notes there. Like anything, at least I will use the notes and find them and read them. So,
sure, yeah, and I'll be happy to see some new stuff as well. Is there anything else that you would like to share with the audience? I think we're kind of reaching the end here.
No, I think feel free to hit me up if you have any questions about this or anything about Elixir in general. And, I'm also always open for any Elixir projects. If people I also have to write some JavaScript sometimes because it's hard to find enough Elixir work. So if anybody has something, they're free to hit me up.
Where can people find you on social media or GitHub or?
Yes, I used to be much more active on Twitter. I'm not so much anymore. I have a Mastodon and I hang out sometimes on Elixir forum, more reading, but you can always send me an email or send me a message on Twitter or LinkedIn, of course. So yeah, LinkedIn might be easiest or email.
Sounds great.
And you can see my website also where I publish my writings. I don't write enough, so don't expect a lot.
We'll make sure to get that in the show notes as well. Victor, thank you so much for joining us today. Great conversation. I've learned a bit.
It was nice.
Come back again.
Thanks.